Good morning, everybody. Just going to start with some simple housekeeping items first. This webinar today will be recorded, so all participants will receive a copy of a link to the recording after the webinar is completed. We plan to hold the webinar here today for about 35 to 40 minutes, after which we will be having a question and answer session. You are welcome to put any of your questions at any time in the question and answer chat box, and we will try our best to get to as many questions as we can once we have concluded after about 35 or 40 minutes. So without further ado, good morning to those in Asia and good evening to our friends in the US and Europe, or to wherever else people may be listening in today. I'm honoured today to be joined by three Asia experts who you can see here with me, all with long histories and a variety of experiences across Asia. I will be having them introduce themselves very shortly. Myself included, we are all part of the global mobility community. So today's webinar will very much be from a global mobility and talent management perspective. But we are here today to discuss and debate a little about the cities of Hong Kong, Singapore and Tokyo, about the competition between them in terms of what city is going to win the contest, if you like, of around where business is going to be based in Asia, or where businesses are going to locate their Asia headquarters or their regional hubs. My name is Steve Verson, and I will be your host today. Many of you will know me from Reload Japan, here in Japan, where I'm speaking to you today, and also through Reload Network Asia, where we are a DSP across 17 countries in Asia. I have spent the last 5 years or so in Singapore. Also have spent a bit of time in Myanmar, but most of my experience in Asia has been spent in Japan, where I've been here for about 25 years now. So I'm actually going to start today just with some insights into Tokyo in terms of its strengths and weaknesses when it comes to its attractiveness as being a sort of an Asia headquarter or regional hub, for companies in Asia. So Tokyo is, of course, a huge trade and finance center in Asia, and it is by far the largest GDP of the three cities that we're talking about today. It's politically and economically very stable. You could probably argue that it's the most stable country in Asia at the moment. And surprisingly, after 10 or more years of deflationary kind of cycles, it's probably the city with the lowest cost of living when you compare it to Hong Kong and to Singapore. One of the other advantages that Japan has for companies that want to bring expatriates to work in their companies in Japan is that the visa and immigration process in Japan, while it is slightly complex, it is actually does not discriminate much in terms of the people that you can bring to Japan, as long as they have a degree in the area of work that they're in. Then basically there are no quotas, there is no labour testing and that sort of thing. So from that perspective, Japan is quite attractive in terms of bringing people to this country. However, its weaknesses would have to be, one of its biggest weaknesses would have to be its unattractive tax rates, both corporate and personal. As Japan, the taxes here are sort of between 30 and 40%, which is probably about twice of what you would expect in Hong Kong or Singapore. Furthermore, Japan's unique culture, which can be challenging at times, and also it's the language barrier that the Japanese language creates, do not help its attractiveness when compared to the locations such as Hong Kong and Singapore. So that's just a little bit of initial insight. I'm now going to pass things over to Fred. Maybe he can comment a little bit on, Tokyo's strengths and weaknesses, and then also give us some insights into the city of Hong Kong. And Fred, if
Thanks,
you could
Steve.
just make a brief introduction as you start there, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. Greetings from Hong Kong, everybody. Thanks for attending today. It's always great to get everybody together. I feel like I should be doing this more often. I do it less than I used to, but certainly when I do, it's always enjoyable. But yeah, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Fred Schloman. I'm a partner here at Pan Ocean Advisory Group. My career, though, has really been management consulting with a focus on talent mobility. So I used to work for an organization where we focused primarily on that aspect, which was aligning your human capital strategy with your business strategy and basically engaging and optimizing talent mobility globally. So that was what I've been focusing on for most of my career. I mean, to your point, Steve, yes, there's a lot of strengths and weaknesses. I think, Japan, as you say, it's the largest economy in the region aside from China. And certainly in terms of city GDPs, Tokyo is at the top of the list globally. It has the largest GDP of any city in the world, actually, at this point, which is, I think it's $1.8 trillion. I mean, you're, larger than many countries, actually. I think you're right on as far as the strengths and weaknesses. I mean, it's got the largest market. It's from a mobility standpoint. It's safe, it's clean. I might debate you on the cost side, but depending, you can find any data you want these days on this type of thing. But it is, I think the tax rate is one of the biggest issues that many companies find there. The cost of doing business is very high. And Tokyo used to have a lot of headquarters, right? Many, many years ago. And that has changed significantly over time. And part of it was the whole income tax aspect to it, I think. But also, I think as a gateway into other markets, there are other locations that are more feasible. For example, if you're looking for Southeast Asia or India, then Singapore has a lot of advantages. And Hong Kong, on the other hand, is more and more pivoting towards the China gateway. So I think in that sense, Tokyo is a bit out of the stream of where the activity is happening in that sense. So I think that's going to be my sense, will be the challenge for Japan in general, will be how do you connect into the larger trends in the region. You have the RCEP, which is the regional economic agreement between, I believe, 20 countries in Asia. That will help, obviously, all members of that. But, I think Singapore and Hong Kong are probably positioned a bit more favorably in the context of that agreement as well. So in terms of Hong Kong, Hong Kong is suffering, I think, from a bit of a misperception problem. In the sense that, yes, we've had the riots here, or the protests that occurred in July 2019, and as soon as that wrapped up, we were hit with COVID, and so it's just been one thing after another here in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is still a vibrant financial center. I mean, it has one of the largest foreign direct investment flows of any country in the world. I think second only to the U.S. So I mean, it's a huge market. The capitalization of the Hong Kong exchange here is I think in the top 5 in the world as well. It dwarfs most of the other Asian markets if you look at it that way. So it continues to be a central hub for financial services and insurance companies, and anyone who really wants to do business in mainland China is going to be in Hong Kong. Whether you decide to relocate your headquarters for other reasons, around the national security law, that's another question. But certainly, if you want to do business in mainland China or in the Greater Bay Area, which is sort of the up and coming other regional agreement that we're seeing, it's a China organization, right? But it's certainly an opportunity to tap into 77 million people. Any company that wants to take advantage of that is going to be having their operations here in Hong Kong, whether it's the headquarters or we could debate these days, does it matter where the headquarters is given the remote working scenario we're all dealing with? So, Hong Kong has many strengths in that sense. I think the weaknesses, of course, is the geopolitical aspects to it. And, that unfortunately has had some significant impact on how people perceive Hong Kong internationally. But overall, I think, it continues to be a key city in Asia. Will it be the sort of the multicultural worldwide city it used to be? I think certainly it'll have that aspect, but like any business, you pivot to circumstances, and Hong Kong is pivoting. And the business model is changing to take advantage of changing environmental issues, right? Or in this case, geopolitical issues. So yeah, strengths and minuses there certainly, but Hong Kong is still an important global financial center.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so I'm now going to cut to Sean. And Sean, give us, how about Singapore in terms of its strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Just quickly then, yeah, I'm Sean Collins. I've been in Asia for 24 years. That's split between China and Singapore. So I've worked on both the vendor side as well as in-house. And now I'm running a consulting firm as well as a recruiting business within the industry. So yeah, so Asia's been my kind of region for pretty much all my working life, to be honest with you. Singapore, without the risk of sounding like a salesperson for the Singapore government, there's a huge amount going for it, to be honest with you. It's a really stable, safe country. The political system hasn't changed for years, so the government is able to make kind of long-term investments, long-term bets, and they've been very thoughtful and clever in where they've kind of built that infrastructure and investments. And you look at some of the kind of tech parks around med tech, fintech. They've got a really strong tech startup ecosystem that they've built, so they're attracting a lot of tech startups into the country. And a lot of this is being driven by a couple of organizations. So Enterprise Singapore and EDB, Economic Development Board of Singapore, both government run. And they do quite an incredible job in attracting business to Singapore, number one. There's a lot of incentives and grants and assistance available to companies, as well as helping companies here kind of expand and internationalize. So that, in a way, kind of attracts companies to set up their headquarters here, because they can tap into a lot of that kind of assistance and grants available from the government. And they've got the Global Investor Program as well, so they're kind of enticing a lot of these big kind of global investors to Singapore to set up kind of angel funds. You've got Edward Saverin that came here. He was probably the biggest name that came several years ago. And even companies are starting to, move their global HQ here. You see Dyson did that a couple of years ago.
Right.
And right now, 40, quite incredibly, 46% of Asia regional HQs are based in Singapore within the region. So it's quite clearly the top destination for Asian headquartered companies, Asia headquarters for multinational companies in Singapore. And a lot of companies see Singapore, it's a low tax environment. Income tax is very low, just slightly above Hong Kong. Corporate tax is very low. There's a lot of incentives for companies that come in and kind of set up. The talent pool, is a very strong talent pool, English speaking, educated, and the government has, kind of invested a lot in terms of its education system. The universities are very kind of focused on emerging technologies, emerging industries, which feeds a lot of talent into these new growing kind of industries. But on the flip side, that talent market is very tight right now. Unemployment is very low, so that's becoming a challenge for companies to find the right talent to help the business grow. So that's driving up salaries, and some companies are having to look elsewhere to find the talent. In some cases, it's simply not available in Singapore, which leads to bringing talent into Singapore, but also potentially placing roles outside as well. In terms of the headwinds, there are headwinds as well. You may have seen the recent Economist Intelligence Unit report that Singapore is now the second most expensive city in the world, behind Tel Aviv. It's joint second with Paris. So that's gone up a few places above Hong Kong now. So that, is certainly a factor for expats coming into Singapore. The cost of schooling is really high, and it's very difficult to get into local schooling, almost impossible, unless you want to put your kids in a school on the fringes of Singapore. Housing is expensive, and it's very difficult it's pretty much impossible to get into subsidized government housing in Singapore unless you're a resident. So these factors are playing into potential headwinds for Singapore as well, because it would drive up costs for bringing in expats, and foreigners here are kind of reassessing whether it's sustainable to stay here with all these costs. And another headwind we have is, there's been a growing anti-foreigner sentiment, just like many other countries around the world, which has kind of influenced the immigration policy. I think Voon can go into more detail, but that has impacted the ability for companies to bring in, the number of expats that they did in the past. And also, it's impacted potential kind of visa renewals. They took away the letter of consent, which was an easy way for spouses to find employment. So again, with rising kind of costs and the inability in many cases for spouses to be able to work, it's not such a sustainable place for a lot of foreigners now in Singapore.
Okay, perhaps if I cut over to Voon, Voon, also in Singapore, how do you sort of see Singapore's strengths and weaknesses, and please, short introduction before you do.
Okay, my name is Voon. For those of you who know me, I've been running the regional immigration for two of the largest global immigration firm for the past 15 years. Just started my own firm last year, and are now also helping clients in the region to manage the immigration programs. At the same time, also be equity partners of one of the largest local firms and immigration firm in China called VisaCare. Prior to this, myself had been working as a banker in China and Hong Kong for about 7 years, so know the region pretty well as well, and been traveling to meet clients and bankers alike in the early days of my banking careers in the region. Yeah. All right. Without further ado, I think I just add on a couple of points that Sean has made. I think, as most of you would know, Singapore is one of the most open economy in the region, and has constantly been ranked top in terms of the competitiveness. If you look at the global competitiveness ranking by the IMD Business School, Singapore ranked top in APAC and fifth in the world. Actually was ranked top in the world just a year ago, and it dropped to the 5th place. As well as the Global Talent Competitiveness Index by INSEAD, Singapore ranked 2nd in the world after Switzerland. So this shows that Hong Kong is definitely a right place to do business. The ease of setting up business, the hub and financial hub and air and freight hubs that help Singapore to be a leaders, to be one of the key regional headquarter location for many of the multinational company. And of course, I mean, if you look at the People Action parties, they've been ruling Singapore since day one. And it has been a very stable and pragmatic government with many pro-business policy and regulations, and especially the tripartite alliance among government, employers, and labor relationship to ensure a stable workforce. Not to mention that Singapore has one of the highest skilled workforce in the region with good spoken and written English language, and the culture is also very attuned to the Western culture. So they understand the Western culture, and with a mix of Asian teaching and understanding of the language ability of the local workforce were always been an advantage as compared to the other locations, especially Japan. And also the good infrastructure they built in, with the high-speed internet, roads and hospitals and etc. I think this and school, and good selections of international school been set up. And this was planned. I think if you look at it, it's been planned for 20 years prior to the minister has in the Prime Minister office. They have a national population policy division that helps to bring in talent over the past 20, 30 years. And it is on continuing progress policy that they look at facility that how to make it comfortable to attract expatriate to come to Singapore to live and stay. But as I say, all these have changed over the past couple of years or past couple of elections, when the local voter has started to become more demanding, and under the social pressure and political pressure, the government has to tweak the immigration policy to make it more stringent in terms of the talent. They are now looking for highly qualified talents instead of in the past that everybody can just get an employment visa or employment pass in Singapore to work. And spouses can work under the letter of consent. All this has changed over the past couple of years, especially when the opposition start playing this, local first card in terms of the job in the local market. So, but good, I mean, that Singapore is still one of the most open immigration policy in the region. I mean, if you look at the population and the workforce, they are about 1/3 of the Singapore current workforce is made up of the foreigners. So there's no way Singapore is going to turn back and look internally for all the talents they need. They still need talent. It's just that the policy is tweaked to now look for a qualified talent rather than anybody to come and work in Singapore. Right.
Okay, I'm going to move to another question now. Sort of the trends that we're seeing in the flow of expats, foreign employees, to these locations. Are there any sort of patterns that we can see emerging in terms of what sort of multinational companies are deciding in terms of where to locate their people? Sean, maybe if I could go to you, what are you sort of seeing in this space from your perspective, being in the recruiting space there?
Yeah, well, I mean, COVID has obviously impacted this question. I mean, Japan has pretty much been closed, so you cannot get anybody in there. Hong Kong, I think, is very difficult as well. And if you do want to go to Hong Kong, you still get 3 weeks quarantine in a tiny hotel room in the
right
beyond. And Singapore, of course, during the majority of COVID, it was also closed, but now they've opened up. So, companies can bring people into Singapore now. They're granting, work permits. And Singapore's had quite a pragmatic approach to COVID. They've had the lockdowns, but they are starting to open up and live with, live with it now. So they've got a lot of VTL, vaccinated travel lanes set up. Quarantine has been reduced to just a few countries. You can do stay-home notice for 7 days for quite a few countries as well. So in that way, it's opened up. So it is a location where companies can quite easily bring in talent now compared to other parts of Asia. One thing I've noticed in the recruiting space is trying to fill roles in Hong Kong with your typical kind of expat talent in some of those big roles. It's been incredible, the number of people I've spoken to that are planning to leave next year and are not interested in looking in new jobs. So that was a bit of an eye-opener. So I think there's a lot of people there that have reassessed living in Hong Kong and Some of them are going back to their home countries. Some of them are choosing other locations, lower cost locations, and the ability to work remotely is enabling that. And even in Singapore, Singapore has had a kind of like a two-tiered approach, where if you're not a Singaporean or a PR, it's been very difficult to travel because you need special approvals to come back in. And for a long time, it's very difficult to get that, which meant a lot of expats were stranded overseas. And that's really affected, a lot of foreigners' psyche and their kind of perception of Singapore and Singapore's kind of welcomeness for expat talent. So a lot of, quite a few foreigners now are also reassessing, whether they need to be in Singapore, and some of them are also moving back to their home country in Australia, the UK, Europe, US, just to be closer to family and not have to face these restrictions in case, COVID continues and they're not able to go back, easily to see family. So yeah, COVID has certainly impacted, the flow of talent and people assessing where they need to be. And the other trend, of course, is the ability, companies allowing people to work from different locations. So employees now have that option available to them.
And Fred, perhaps you're seeing some different trends, and I know you might have some differing opinions on what's happening in Hong Kong. Some people describe it as an exodus. I think you mentioned when we were talking the other day, you were mentioning that you don't consider it to be as such. Maybe you can give some insight there.
Sure. I mean, I think COVID is obviously the key factor here in terms of ease of movement in and out of Hong Kong at the moment. The 3-week quarantine is quite difficult to manage for many people. From a movement standpoint, I think the expat side of it, I don't see the trends of huge numbers of expats leaving. First of all, if they're assigned to Hong Kong with a large organization, it's not like they can tomorrow decide to move somewhere else, right? I mean, they have a job, right? So to that extent, I think those on assignment here from large companies, they may be here for a limited time, but I don't see a large number of people exiting. And certainly companies, from my perspective, there's not a large number of companies shifting headquarters. They may be thinking about it, but I don't see that happening. I read a survey recently, I think it was by Internations Group or something, one of those surveys that talked about, the Hong Kong dropping dramatically in the rankings for two reasons. One was political instability, and the other one was housing costs. And so if you start breaking that stuff down, first of all, Hong Kong's always had high housing costs. So has Singapore, so has Tokyo. So from my perspective, that as a reason to leave Hong Kong is a bit dubious. The political stability aspect, however, is interesting because if you compare it across the region, Hong Kong, has stability, certainly has taken a hit, but since the national security law, it's actually improved significantly. From a commercial and a business standpoint, companies are much more readily able to do business here without fear of protests shutting down, commercial access and that sort of thing. So I think stability has actually improved here in Hong Kong since 2019 significantly. You can disagree with the politics, but what you can't disagree with is the fact that it's much more stable here now. As a point in fact, if you look at press freedom and internet freedom in Hong Kong following all the recent developments, it now ranks about the same as Singapore. So, I mean, Singapore's always had censorship and controls. Hong Kong is moving in that direction, but I think people are reacting to the change, not necessarily the absolute level of freedom or political environment here. So I don't see a huge exodus from an expat perspective. People are talking about it for sure. But where you do see the exodus is for citizens or residents that had B&O passports. There we've seen almost 80 or 90,000 B&O passport applications being filed with the UK to migrate to the UK from Hong Kong. And B&O passports, in case you're not familiar, were issued in 1997 or before, prior to the handover to China. And so it's not something, it's an ongoing thing that's getting issued. It's just those individuals and families that have B&O passports, for whatever reasons, are taking advantage of it. So there is a large number, I think, as I said, 88 or 90,000, I just read this morning, who have taken advantage of applying. And the expectation is that number would continue to grow. I think outstanding B&O passports are around 300,000 in Hong Kong at the moment. there's some percentage, of course, that are going to take advantage of that. So I think residents and citizens of Hong Kong, there is an exodus for a variety of reasons. I wonder how much of this would have happened anyway, even if the protests and the political situation hadn't changed. If the UK had offered their resettlement program, I would have suspected a lot of people would have taken it anyway. So exodus certainly from a citizen resident standpoint, but from an expat standpoint, as I mentioned earlier, companies have to do business in Hong Kong, and if they want to do business in China, Hong Kong is the starting point. Citibank and HSBC are ramping up. They're bringing in people to take advantage of the opportunities around wealth management products and things of that sort. So I think, certainly the Hong Kong's status as a financial center continues, and I think there's always going to be a demand for talented staff, whether they're from China or elsewhere. And the other interesting point is that, of course, Chinese companies are ramping up their headquarters here in Hong Kong. You are seeing some drop from the US side, but from other nationalities, not so much. So in balance, Hong Kong has always lagged Singapore in terms of number of headquarters in the region and so forth. But in terms of an access point, the RMB trade, issuance of green bonds from China. I mean, all these things are coming out of China or into China, and Hong Kong really is the point of focus for a lot of that activity. So there's a need for talent. I think similar to what Sean and Voon have said, of course, getting top talent is always difficult. And so that continues to be a challenge here for Hong Kong companies. But the demand is there for sure.
Right.
And I think foreign talent will continue to be required here in Hong Kong. And I don't see a huge exodus of expats.
Okay. Voon, how about you? What do you see between these three locations, and maybe more from a sort of a visa and immigration perspective? Any patterns that you're seeing?
Yeah, I tend to be in the middle ground between Sean and Fred. I think yes, at the same time, there's not huge numbers of exodus of expatriate, but there have been numbers. There have been queries coming in. They have been seeing. We have been doing some work for some companies moving their businesses and people from Hong Kong to Singapore. I mean, if you look at the past 18 months since the or maybe past 2.5 years since the unrest in Hong Kong, and then coupled with the pandemics, many of the banks have started planning to move some of their key people, as well as their trading desk to Singapore. I mean, one of the recent survey is interesting to note that, by the Asia Security Industry and Financial Market Association, nearly half of its 155 members say they are contemplating on moving staff or function away from Hong Kong due to the operation challenges from the quarantine policy. That's one of the reason quoted. And at the same time, I think, the Singapore government, being pragmatic, business-oriented government ministers, will take advantage of situation like this. They've been ramping up their effort to bring in banks to offer them tax incentives and others efforts to entice them to move certain function to Singapore. And at the same time, I think if you look at due to the political unrest, a lot of the funds in Hong Kong have been moving to Singapore, especially the wealthy people have been moving their funds from the banks in Hong Kong and move them to Singapore. I have many ex-colleagues who have been in this banking business and are telling me that, they've been ramping up their hiring as well over the past couple of years due to the increased business activities with the situation in Hong Kong. And yeah, rightly to say that I would think that there'll be more banks. I have been reading from the news that a couple of banks, Commerce Bank, Westpac, and even JP Morgan's have already moved some of their functions to Singapore. And on top of it, the past 18 months, we receive queries or work from companies, industries such as IT, F&B and media. I think they are selective industries. They are moving from Hong Kong to Singapore. I wouldn't say that, those are very close of manufacturing related and with the China market. I'm sure, like what Fred say, it is where they are doing business. They will be there. It doesn't make sense for them to move people to Singapore and then go back to China to do business.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just from what I see from my perspective is, you do see sort of some flows from Hong Kong to Singapore, but I'm not seeing the same kind of flows to Japan, for example. So, as companies make decisions to perhaps do something with their Hong Kong location, and it is a lot of it is focused, I think, around banking. You're not seeing that flow on to Japan, although Japan is kind of stating that they're wanting to get into, wanting to have more, finance, in Tokyo and even in places like Osaka. But I really don't think that they, have sort of lined things up very well to attract companies like Singapore has. So. Well, at this point here, I've actually got a bit of a poll for the audience, but if we are going to choose a city that's going to sort of win this contest, if you like, for where companies are going to base their businesses in Asia and where a lot of the expats are going to flow to, I just wonder what the audience is thinking. So I'm going to open up a poll here. I'm just going to launch it now. Please choose a location and let us know what you think.
I was trying to vote 3 times and it doesn't let me.
Okay, and I'm going to now share the results. So I think you can see there that most people the majority of people have chosen Singapore. So I don't know, Fred, what your thoughts are around who's going to win this contest, if you like.
I'm not quite sure what the contest is, but I do think in terms of I think certainly from a number of perspectives, I think Singapore has a lot of advantages. I think Hong Kong is really turning into a China gateway. So I think that makes it more of a niche location. It's an incredibly important financial center and will continue to be so. But I think the focus of Hong Kong really is towards China and connecting Greater Bay Area to the rest of the world and the region. I think Tokyo, will continue to be a huge economy in itself. And so in that sense, it will stay as it was. I think Tokyo to some extent needs this type of movement less than any of the other locations. It can, and on its own, it can stay. Whether more expats flow in or out, it probably just doesn't. It's a blip on the screen, right? So I think Singapore certainly has many advantages that companies will select, particularly if you think about the competing laws from different jurisdictions. Particularly in the banking area, you don't want to be caught between those. And I think Singapore offers an alternative, certainly from a headquarters standpoint. But I think business-wise, Hong Kong will continue to grow, and companies need to do business here if they want to connect with China and the Greater Bay Area. So there need to be qualified staff. So I think in that sense, Hong Kong's strategy has changed. Like any business, right? The environmental conditions around you are changing, and you need to adapt, right? And so that's what Hong Kong is doing. And I think ultimately it will be successful. Again, the Singapore, on the other hand, I think has more of a global appeal at this point. At least that's what the trend indicates.
Right. Sean, from what you see?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very bullish on Singapore, of course, for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. There's a good question came in actually, talking about Malaysia. And
Yes,
potential for other countries to attract regional HQs, and I definitely see I see that as a potential threat to Singapore, Hong Kong, and Tokyo. We're already seeing operational centers, shared service centers moving out of Singapore into Malaysia, Philippines, India. So that trend may continue. They may start moving other functions out. And with remote working becoming more kind of commonplace, I spoke to two candidates recently. One was about to move to Malaysia, another one was about to move to Phuket. So yeah, there will be more displacement of talent just through ability to work remotely. The other thing I've noticed with Tokyo is, we've been speaking to a number of Japanese companies, mainly in pharma, that are looking to bring in more foreign talent into their executive team. They want to become more global. They're acquiring companies, but their executive board in Japan is all Japanese. So they're looking to bring really senior level execs into Japan to kind of diversify the board. And some of them are also moving headquartered functions out of Japan into, one was in Singapore, another one was moved to the US because of a big acquisition. So I think from Japan's perspective, you will see more of that as companies, go global and make more global investments, and trying to bring in more kind of global talent into their teams.
Okay. So thanks, Sean. And yeah, definitely Japan, we have seen in the last 10 to 20 years a lot of joint ventures, a lot of M&As. Japanese companies got very deep pockets, very cash rich, and they are wanting to continue to globalize and become more diverse. And we are seeing in Japan that a lot of Japanese companies are needing to as you say, diversify more and become more sort of international. So, there is, I think Japan is set, for a good future, and a consistent flow of expats to the location because of it. I do, however, think that Singapore is perhaps going to win the race in the next sort of 2 to 3 years. Especially right now, Singapore seems to be doing a lot more, with sort of living with COVID and adopting good policy around bringing people in besides the circumstances. Whereas you see, Japan, for example, basically has had its borders closed for 12 months now, and they may even have them closed for another 2 or 3 months yet. So it's I think Singapore has been very smart in that way. Voon, any sort of final lasting comments from you with regards to?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a zero-sum game. I think there's still a lot of regional opportunity for each city to play. I mean, I've been seeing more and more, from the multinational company that now looking to spread their risk, by having 2 or 3 regional offices, to take care of their growing market demands in Asia, Hong Kong and Japan and Singapore, in the respective region could still be a kind of a multi-regional company models in Asia. We have been seeing so, because if you look at some of the relocation company, how they were set up is like, like you have Hong Kong to focus on the North Asia, whereas you have Singapore to look at the Southeast Asia and South Asia region, right? I think that trend might continue in a little while. Those that we mentioned, like especially banks and financial industry, I think those are specific, and then the advantage of the countries play a big part of it, so there might be a different driven by the industry need for company to decide where to put their regional headquarters. And of course, the tax incentive, play a big part of it.
Yes,
I'm sure, we are seeing company. If I heard Sean mention Dyson, but I'm sure this guy has got 5-10 years of tax holiday in Singapore before he moved his headquarters out from UK.
Yeah.
So those will be the key factors, I think. If you look at the tax incentive, cost, political stability, infrastructure, law and regulations, and also security and talent pool, right? So all these are the factors to consider before you move
Sure.
the regional head office to any location, right? Coming back to the question that under the Q&A, I think I agree with Sean that the cost in Singapore has been ramping up, high cost, difficult to get talent, or even, I wouldn't say talent, maybe for lower levels of workers, as well as the junior level. There's been a challenge because of the cost of the immigration policy. Has made it very difficult to hire people in Singapore, which is why a large part of the company now are moving certain function across the causeway to JB or KL. Those are the shared services, the back end support. Is inevitable. I mean, with the cost ramping up in Singapore, most of this back end and backroom function will be moved elsewhere. Just like the manufacturing base that Singapore used to have, they are now moved to Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, China. So this is a transition of Singapore economy, part of it. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, thank you. And thank you to Jessica for the question. I'm hoping that we have answered your question there, Jessica. If anybody else does have a question, we've come to the end now, kind of the planned part of the webinar. We will continue to talk about a few things here if there aren't any further questions from others. So I don't have any other questions at the moment. I know the other day when we were talking, Fred, you were kind of mentioning what companies are looking at when they the types of things that they need to look at, and of course I think the environmental side of things is also going to become important in the future. Your thoughts around that, perhaps?
You're talking about the ESG, focus on ESG?
Yes. ESG and the global warming side of things too.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an ongoing concern for everybody. I think certainly ESG has taken hold on the financial area quite quickly, and certainly I think most companies who operate at a global level now have integrated ESG into their operating principles, and look for that with their partners as well as want to promote that externally. I think Hong Kong and China have done quite a bit in issuing green bonds. So you see a lot of that attractiveness as well, where offshore and onshore investors in the Greater China area want to know that they're investing in organizations that focus on ESG. And so the green bond market has taken off quite a bit. Obviously, there's always issues around greenwashing and things of that sort. But I think overall, in Asia in particular, I would say China and Hong Kong are driving a lot of the ESG green investments through their green bond programs. So,
okay. I have another question from a panelist here asking about, are the cities attractive to specific industries? Hong Kong, obviously banking is still.
Yeah, insurance and banking, I think it continues to have that connection, and I think the connection to the Greater Bay Area with research and development and high tech focus, that's one of the goals of the Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area plan, is to build this region into a high tech R&D center. So I think that we'll see that increasing over time as well. But the base, there's 4 pillars in Hong Kong. It's financial, property, logistics, and tourism, right? So it's trying to broaden its footprint now with the R&D and the high tech focus. But the ESG aspect of all these companies' investment opportunities is growing significantly. So.
Right. Yeah,
I think for Singapore is probably, as well, banking, since that is one of the key financial hubs here. And the government, or the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the central bank, has been pushing very hard to bring in businesses from the cryptocurrency The fintech has been developing very steadily in the past 5 years or so. Yeah, I think those are the, of course, tech industry, they will have all the big boys are having their regional headquarters in Singapore, right? People like the Facebook, the Amazon and Google.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And logistics, of course, is a huge logistics hub in Singapore, which will continue to be in Singapore. They're working with Singapore Management University to develop green supply chain kind of technologies and courses. So, Singapore government is trying to kind of also lead the way in terms of its green initiatives. Look at the building regulations now. Some of the kind of incentives that they put in place. So yeah, I agree with Fred. ESG is going to be an important factor for companies to choose locations as well, because they want to make sure that they can meet their carbon emission goals.
Yep.
Support the other elements of their ESG strategy around diversity, and that may even play into things like LGBT Q+ and countries' ability to support in respect to freedoms of different groups.
I've got another question from an attendee regarding the sort of the outside of these cities. Is there a dark horse or a region that could potentially take over from one of these cities in the future? Sean, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's a nice question, that.
I can jump in on that one. I think, if you look at all these, there's so many organizations publishing indices about, this or that, or economic viability. But Shanghai and Beijing are regularly showing up on those lists. And I think Shanghai in particular would be my sort of sense of one of these dark horses. That it's not so dark in the sense that I think everybody knows about Shanghai. It's just maybe it hasn't hit the momentum on the index reports or something. But Shanghai is certainly, in my mind, one of the very vibrant, viable cities in the Greater China area that could replace Hong Kong from a financial perspective, depending on how the RMB gets liberalized. So I think that is one area. We were talking earlier, Steve, Jakarta will have the largest population in the world by 2030. Size means a lot in terms of economic development and attracting business. So I think you can't, Jakarta has its own issues, particularly with, I believe it's sinking, right? But aside from that, I think size builds success, right? And I think the larger, look at Tokyo, right? It just, once it gets to a certain point, it just generates its own momentum. So I think Jakarta, it would be Shanghai initially, but I think Jakarta has potential as well.
And in that regard, Fred, India, you look at the talent there, the kind of R&D setups, the tech, in the government is also trying to invest in its infrastructure and, encourage more business to set up there. So maybe in 20, 30 years, some of these big Indian cities will also be vying for this position.
Potentially,
well.
I think India has a business aspect to it, which makes it difficult. So I think that's where you're going to see, which one tips one way or the other. It's really going to depend on how do you accommodate international business.
Yeah, I will put my money in Shanghai anytime in the next 10 years or so. I don't think in terms of the business as well as the current business environment in India, I don't think they're ready yet for a regional kind of headquarters. And of course, if you look at Shanghai again, a lot depends on the industry that you're in. I think most of the manufacturing based company have already kind of moved the business decision or headquarter or housing most of the key people there. Even if you do a regional headquarters and operation or a senior headquarters for the tax incentive, whatever in Singapore, they are just a limited senior people sitting in Singapore. For the rest of the operations, the rest of the main business is still conducted in Singapore, in China or the region.
Yeah, agreed.
So it is all mainly for tax purposes.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see, sort of between locations like, Jakarta KL, you know, some of your bigger cities in India, you know, who is going to come up with a formula to be, you know, successful, you know, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. It's really going to be quite interesting to, you know, to see. We'll probably be doing that from, you know, from our hospital beds or whatever in 20 years time or whatever. Anyway,
Not that old.
I'm gonna go with that.
Okay, well, you know, I'm not wanting to extend any further past the hour, and we're almost there. So I think I might call an end to today's webinar. So thank you to Fred, to Voon, to Sean. This has been excellent to get some you know, some different perspectives on these three cities. You know, we didn't include Shanghai or some of the other cities for no other reason than I just chose 3 cities. So maybe next time we can, you know, talk about some of the other regions in Asia. And here at Relay Network Asia, we're looking to, you know, hold a few more of these webinars to get different perspectives on things in the region. So I do hope I can invite you to, you know, come and do this again. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you to
Thank you,
our
Steve.
audience today. Really appreciate you joining, and I hope you can join some of our webinars again in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Bye bye,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye.